Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Mary Ann Auld, the managing partner of Kelly Hart and Hallman. In this year, perhaps more than in any other, our elected officials and appointed leaders are working tirelessly to navigate unprecedented challenges and keep our economy strong. Given everything that she has on her plate these days, we are particularly grateful to have with us today Railroad Commission Chairman Christi Craddick. It will be my privilege to introduce her in just a moment, but first I would like to say thank you to all of the sponsors for the Leaders in Government series. Kelly Hart is pleased to be the presenting sponsor of the series, and I'm delighted to be here today representing Kelly Hart. Many thanks also to our platinum sponsors, Bell, BNSF Railway Company, Lockheed Martin, and Simmons Bank. Thank you to our gold sponsor, Spectrum Enterprise. And thank you to our silver sponsors, Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Texas Health Resources, and the University of Texas at Arlington. A quick housekeeping note before we get started. We would love for this to be an interactive conversation today, so please put your questions in the chat feature, and we'll make sure to have those questions asked and answered after Chairman Craddick concludes her remarks. And now to introduce our honored guest. Christi Craddick is a proven leader in Texas. A native of Midland, Chairman Craddick was born into a family that values public service. She earned both her bachelor's degree as a Plan II graduate and her law degree from the University of Texas at Austin, and then began her career as an attorney, specializing in oil and gas, water, tax, electric deregulation, and environmental policy. Since her tenure on the Texas Railroad Commission began in November of 2012, Chairman Craddick has made it a priority to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of the energy industry and the commission itself. And she's accomplished a great deal, modernizing the commission in meaningful ways, educating the public about the oil and gas industry and the significant impact it plays in Texas, and encouraging innovation in ways that have solidified Texas leadership in the energy sector. Chairman Craddick serves as an active member of numerous organizations, including the National Petroleum Council, Southern States Energy Board, the University of Texas Liberal Arts Alumni Advisory Council, and the University of Texas System Chancellors Council. Welcome, Chairman Craddick. Thank you for being here with us today. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Ann, and thank you all for joining me. And it's nice to be in Fort Worth, except I'm sitting in Austin, kind of a new world. And I hear y'all are a little bit colder than I am today. So thank you for having me. But for those of you who thought you were going to show up and hear about railroads, I'm sorry, we do not do BNSF anymore, or UP. We are the oil and gas world and the center of the world, I believe, and probably the most important agency in the entire state, and I would argue the entire country at this point, having to do with oil and gas. So I thought I'd give you a little bit about what we do as an agency, give you some stats, go through what we've been doing this year, because we have been a little bit busy. And then I hope there's some questions at the end too, because I always like to hear what's going on in the real world outside of Austin in a lot of respects. So what we do as an agency, we are the oil and gas regulator in this state. We're 129 years old, and we've been regulating oil and gas for 101 years. So we think we know what we're doing. We're the oldest oil and gas regulatory body in the entire world, and definitely in the entire country. We have been doing oil and gas regulation, but we also do pipelines. So I'm going to start with the more fun stuff and go back to oil and gas and what this means to the entire country in just a minute. We do pipelines, and I say more fun because pipelines are really important to the state. I always say you can drill all you want, but if you cannot get it to market, and pipelines are one of the ways we do that, then it doesn't matter how much you produce. So we are the pipeline regulatory body for the entire state of Texas. That means we do pipelines for interstate, intrastate, and gathering lines, as well as gas utilities, which in your world in Fort Worth is Atmos and or maybe Texas Gas, but probably Atmos to your house and your business. We have 470,000 miles of interstate, intrastate, and gathering lines in the state, and another 500,000 miles of gas utilities in the state. That makes us the biggest pipe state by a sixth. Very important to us. We also do coal and coal mines in this state. People forget about that, but on a cold day, you want coal mines and coal to be up and running. About 30% of our electricity grid on any given day is coal related, and those are in East Texas and South Texas, and those are strip mines, by the way. We also have geothermal, we do a little bit of carbon capture, and we do a lot of oil and gas. So if you are drilling a well in this state, you are coming to the Railroad Commission to get a drilling permit. Today, just about 120 rigs are running in this state or across the state. That's down from 450, which is where we were about 5 years ago. That's down quite a bit, even from the beginning of this year with COVID. We were running at about 300 to 350 at the beginning of the year. So, but 120 is a little bit of a tick up in the last month and a half, so that's not bad. Today, we're producing about 3.9 million barrels of oil a day out of Texas. That's down slightly from 4.2 million barrels, which is where we were in December. So COVID's only affected it just about 7%. We're holding about steady at 3.9 million barrels a day. We also produce about 700,000 barrels of natural gas and oil liquids, as well as about 28 BCF of natural gas. Both of those last two numbers are holding just exactly where they've been, give or take, which is amazing considering what's happened with COVID. Supply and demand is a huge part of this industry. And obviously with nobody driving and or flying, and please get back on airplanes and start driving again, that would help this industry a lot, but that's made a big difference when we've seen demand. Supply is still on the high side, and so that will take some time, I believe, to level out, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. For those of you who aren't in the industry and you go, okay, so that's nice. She does oil and gas, and Fort Worth does a lot of oil and gas. And it kind of started the new oil and gas world started again in the Barnett Shale back in 2007, 2008 world. For those of you who can remember that far back, it seems like a long time ago, but it's only about 11, 12 years at this point. We started and merged that technology of horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing, and it started the new oil and natural gas kind of revolution, not just in this country, but across the world. So what does that mean today to Texas, and how important is what starts in Texas changes the world? And I always have to borrow that phrase from UT Austin. I love that phrase, but I feel like that's typical of where Texas is on a lot of things, and particularly in the oil and gas world. What is started in Texas, sitting in the Barnett Shale, and you sit in the heart of it in the Fort Worth area. What is started and have gone around the country up into Pennsylvania, over in Ohio. You see it now across the state in the Eagle Ford, which is South Texas, is the second biggest basin in the entire country. South Texas sitting, Eagle Ford sitting, which is as big as Prudhoe Bay if you go look at just geography. And then you go out to my hometown space, the Permian Basin, which really is the heart of the oil and gas industry. No offense to anybody else, but it really is. If you look at what's going on in the Permian Basin, it's huge out there, and we think we've just begun out there in a lot of respects. What we knew was a big basin, we now believe has 14 to 20 stacked plays on top of itself in parts of the basin, instead of one play like the Barnett Shale has. And I say play, meaning zone you can drill in. So it is huge. The Permian Basin is huge. I include a couple of counties in New Mexico. Some days they'd like to be part of us, and we're glad to have New Mexico, understanding that oil and gas is important, not just for the country's economy, but also our national security. So I want to talk about the economy and what oil and gas means to this state specifically. It's huge for the state and the jobs it creates. So, and by the way, we're off over 100,000 jobs in the state from COVID related for oil and gas. And that number will probably continue to fluctuate a little bit down, but it's still a huge economic driver for the state. Last year, at the end of last year, the oil and gas industry was 35% of the state's economy. So I started out by saying I'm the most important agency probably in the country for oil and gas, and probably the most important agency regulating in this state, because we regulate about 35% of the state's economy is directly or indirectly related to oil and gas. That's a huge chunk of the state's economy across the board. That's roughly $40 million a day is coming in from oil and gas in property taxes, sales taxes, automobile taxes, every tax you and I pay, as well as this tax called severance taxes. So severance taxes, what do you do with severance taxes? It's when you sever the oil and natural gas from the land, you pay a tax on that. You pay a percentage. And what those taxes, that severance tax goes to the Texas Rainy Day Fund. So the Rainy Day Fund is important when the legislature is in town. It's important anyway. And they were in town about 18 months ago, and here they come again in January. And they always are looking to see what money they can spend. And so the oil and gas industry's given the legislature quite a bit of money in this Rainy Day Fund to spend. Last session, if you'll recall, not back too long ago, we'd had Harvey. So they spent dollars for property tax relief. They spent dollars into schools out of the Rainy Day Fund. And every year we've put about $1 billion out of the Rainy Day Fund goes into schools and permanent school fund. We also are putting dollars out of that Rainy Day Fund into highways. We all need the roads. And so $6.5 billion has gone into roads and road infrastructure in the state. That's a continuing, ongoing dollars as the dollars are available to put into roads and road infrastructure. And the other piece that we've taken about now 7 years ago, we've put $2 billion out of that Rainy Day Fund that's dedicated for water and water infrastructure projects, not just new reservoirs, but updating a city system that acts like a bonding system for the state. So to that $2 billion is the guarantee and the dollars coming out for water and water infrastructure. And still using all that money today, according to the controller's numbers, we have roughly $8 billion sitting in that Rainy Day Fund. That's going to be important for us as we go into this next legislative cycle and go into a budget. Obviously, that's been a challenge this year and will continue to be for the short and long term for the state as COVID has kept everybody home. If you not just look at oil and gas, but you look at people in the hospitality world, a lot of people are having financial issues. And so that Rainy Day Fund is going to be really important to us going forward. It's not going to be as big as we'd hoped, but it still is a significant amount of money available to the legislature that also helps balance our budget out. So the oil and gas industry is really continues to keep the state afloat. So what does that really mean? Because that's a lot of money and it's big dollars. And people always say, well, that's nice. Okay, we're glad that you have the money. But I always like to go back to where a lot of this started for industry as we came back out of the Barnett Shale and came back into the Eagle Ford area down in South Texas. There's a county down there called Karnes County. Now, a lot of people don't know where Karnes County is, but it's a small county in South Texas that 5 years ago was the most productive county in the entire, not just state, but the entire country for oil and natural gas. Today, if you want the most productive county in the entire country, you've either got to go to Reeves County or right now it happens to be Midland County. But Karnes is still in the top 10, by the way. It's a productive county for the state. But they had not seen oil and gas tax dollars really ever come into their county. Today, about 67% of their county budget and roughly 77% of their school budget in Karnes County is based on oil and gas tax dollars. That's a lot for a small county, and multiply that by the counties across the state. And it really begins to show you the impact in a more localized county and area, what oil and gas is really contributing into the community. So it's important for the state. And by the way, for those of you who want to make sure you're driving or using, all of us have these lovely plastic computers or phones we're sitting on. And hopefully, I bet we've all done a lot more cleaning in the last year that we anticipated. If you were sitting at home, people were looking for projects. I bet you did a lot of cleaning. All of those are oil and gas products that are really important for us long term. So, and aren't going away, by the way. So I want to talk for a minute just about what we've done this year. It has been an interesting year, I think, for everybody. When you say 2020, it's going to be enough for most people, and we're all looking forward to 2021, and hopefully we're turning the corner. But 2020 started out as a pretty good year for most of us. And so as we were looking at the industry as an agency, from the agency lens, we were already seeing at the end of last year, about this time last year, the number of drilling permits go down just a little bit. That's not a bad thing necessarily. It just meant that the world was on a reset. If you go back to last summer and the end of last year, you were watching oil and gas companies understand, as they were putting out earnings, for instance, and as they were continuing to drill, that they actually had to make money, not just on reserves, but really make money and have a vibrant program to drill and have a good return on investment. And that's what began to change a little bit. And in doing so, that made a bunch of companies reassess what they were doing as in their drilling programs and how they were going to drill going forward. So at this time last year, we were already off in the number of drilling permits, about 10%, interestingly. People don't realize that, but we were. As we got into this year, normally March is our busiest time of year. It's as people get in back from the holidays, get their programs going again. And we always see some of our highest drilling permit numbers happen as in March. Well, the world changed a lot in March. So some of you might have been on spring break if you have kids. That's where I was in the world. And I got a phone call, and COVID was happening in this country, right? And we were beginning to shut down in the country. But I got a phone call about the time we all started shutting down. And the question was from a particular company, we're going to come back and ask you to proration. And my comment to them back was, we haven't done that since 1973 as an agency. Now, there was full-on proration, obviously, as we were into the early 80s, but we hadn't done that since 1973. And I don't know that we have anybody at the agency who does that, and we need to figure that out. So we did get a filing in front of us as an agency. We obviously had and some of you hopefully joined us, at least maybe not the full 11 hours, but we had about 29,000 people on a Zoom call in April as we took testimony and got a lot of written comments about proration. And I think it was a good opportunity for us as an agency, and frankly for this industry and the country and worldwide market. And for those of you who are interested, South Korea may have something going on. They were our second largest viewing country in the entire world. We don't know why. And for those of you who really didn't want to know what was going on, you should have been in Hawaii. Nobody viewed from Hawaii, by the way. So they must have been on the beach at that point. I think I would have had a good time on the beach. But it gave us an opportunity during that time period for about a good 6 weeks to hear from industry of all sizes, of all parts of the sector, whether you're an exploration company, you produce your pipeline, or you are selling it on the worldwide market and developing products. We heard from everybody, in small and large, and it was interesting how people came down on the subject, and it wouldn't have been necessarily how I would have guessed going into it. And I think it was important for us to understand that. Not just for us, but frankly for the rest of the country and the rest of the world. We're having lots of conversations with Washington, D.C. and other states. Obviously, we got caught in Saudi Arabia and Russia still thinking they controlled the price of oil and that demand was going to come back quickly. And the United States understanding that while we were producing roughly 13 million barrels of oil at that point, 4.5 to 5 million barrels coming out of Texas, that we are part of the conversation and we are all very interconnected. And that was clear as the price of oil went negative to $37 one morning on a Monday morning. And my phone started blowing up. Has this ever happened? No, not in my lifetime. And I hope I never see it again, by the way. But what we found after that conversation is, frankly, the markets work, and that the free markets work. Not perfectly, but the free markets work. And that's the direction this agency continues to look at as we are moving forward, not just with rules and regulations, but the philosophy at this agency, it works. And so while that part was going on, the other important part for us as an agency continued to be, what can we really do to help people while they're trying to figure out how they can stay in business and stay in their companies aren't at work? What do we do? And so that became a priority for us. We managed and through that, and frankly, we've been home as an agency for the most part. At least part of our agency's been home since the middle of March as well, kind of like everybody else. But not if you were out in Pampa. I don't think anybody went home. They're home today because it's icing up there. But I don't think anybody really went home as far as inspectors. So between us waiving timelines and giving people more time, I think we looked at 27 different timelines and rules and regulations that we've waived or given people more time to comply. We also managed to continue to work. And I think that's been the important part we've learned. Marianne talked about how one of my priorities has been IT upgrade, and it continues to be. We are filing things online. We weren't like some of our sister agencies that you dropped a filing in a box and we check it every 5 days. We actually had our mailroom open. Our inspectors have been more efficient than they ever have been. We're online. We're in where we should be for inspectors. We're well plugging and we're hitting those metrics as well. And as of about a month ago, we have now putting more than 25% of our agency in Austin back to work in the building. So we feel like we've managed through and we'll continue to do that going forward. The other issues that have kind of gone on while we've been dealing with this and have been for the last year and a half have been flaring. I thought I'd touch on that for just a minute. Flaring is an issue. It is an issue. It has been an issue. And frankly, it's not an easily solved issue for this state. When you look at it, it's Texas, New Mexico, and North Dakota are the three states that really have some flaring challenges. Obviously, those numbers are down for us, not just because drilling, but I think companies are more aware that they need to be thinking about flaring, that they need to try to connect with a pipe. We've had more pipelines built to get those products to market. But that is an ongoing challenge for us as an agency. Like I said, for the industry too. Next week, we have our public meeting and we have on our docket to vote on a new flaring data sheet. And I expect that will be what we vote on. I don't think we'll do any amendments to that at this point. We'll see where we get next week. But that data sheet's going to be important for us. It's a good step forward for this agency to give us more information and to make us more transparent. And I think is one of our priorities, obviously, as we continue to watch what we do with flaring, as well as how we continue to get companies to really focus on that. Hopefully they are looking at at connecting before they do their drilling program. And we really need pipes to work with companies. I think it's across the spectrum. It's going to take all of us being creative and smart about how we deal with flaring in this state. So that's one of the ongoing projects we've got going forward. Thought I'd touch for just a minute about where we are as an agency. Some of you may have heard me talk through the years. We are a fee-based agency. And what does that mean? It means in 2010, when we became a fee-based agency and oil was $100 a barrel, that was great. We were issuing 25,000 drilling permits a year, and we had a lot of money, which is why we started IT Upgrade. We also thought that was a great idea in the legislature. 14-15 came around, and that's not that long ago, but if you think about it, that's when we had a dip in price of oil. We got down to $27 a barrel for a short term, and at that point, industry got smart. And what they did was start really doing horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing across the state. Before 14-15, as an agency, we were issuing about a third of our drilling permits, give or take, were unconventional, meaning horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing, and the rest of them, the 2/3, were conventional. After 14-15, it flipped. And so now today, about 90% of our drilling permits are unconventional and about 10% are conventional. That's a huge difference. It's also a huge difference in the number of drilling permits we're issuing. So we were averaging before this year about somewhere between about 12,000 a year. This year, obviously, we're going to be down, and we are off 73% in the number of drilling permits we're issuing. That's good news in the fact that we know that industry will innovate and figure out how to come back in as we come out of this with different technology, new technology, or smarter about their drilling programs. But what that does to us as an agency, it means our budget's off about 25%. So we are, like I said, a fee-based agency. So we quit hiring in April, like everybody else. We quit buying trucks. We are still in an IT upgrade. So for those of you who don't know, we are on a mainframe with Fortran. Yes, if you don't know what that is, go ask somebody with some gray hair, because it is old technology. And our goal has been to get off the old technology and not just patch, but really to put new technology in place to make us more efficient, which we have been and have seen real results. For those of you get drilling permits from us, when I got to this agency 8.5 years ago, it was taking us 45 days to 60 days to get a drilling permit out because we were doing everything in hard copy. Today, even if we were as busy as we were last year, it's taking us 2 to 3 days because we've upgraded that part of our world, and it makes a huge difference for us. So more efficient, but also, frankly, more transparent. Everybody wants our data. Everybody wants to know where the wells are, what's going on with those wells, and they want more information. And so that's our priority, is really to continue the IT upgrade. That being said, as we go into this next legislative session, our ask really is, and for those of you who talk to legislators, remind them, we need a consistent budget. We're probably the only agency that dips and goes up and down with an industry. And frankly, that's very inefficient as an agency, and our workload does not go down. We found it took us 5 years to get back to 840 people. And I say that we hit that number in December. We don't have the volume of people to retire, for instance, like we did in 2014-15. So our budget cycle as we go in, like everybody else, is going to be a priority for us in this next legislative session. But we have some special challenges going forward, and we really want to keep good people. We want to continue plugging wells with our abandoned well program, and we need to make sure we're out inspecting. That's a priority for us. So that's part of what we're talking to the legislature as they come back in January. The last thing I kind of want to touch on is just that we're in an election cycle. Thankfully, I think for all of us, it's over. Well, we at least get to finish voting next week. I don't know if we'll win or if it's over, but we at least get to finish voting next week. So I want to kind of talk about for a minute what we've done and how we've worked with this administration a little bit differently than the last administration, and some concerns we have if the administration changes and how that would affect, I think, all of us as a state and as an industry. So when the Obama administration walked out the door, we as an agency were watching roughly 144 rules and regulations that they had either implemented or proposed that would be more regulations on top of what this agency already does. That's a lot of rules and regulations. And in my philosophy, that costs a lot of time and a lot of money to comply. We've had rules and regulations for a long time as an agency. We think we're in best practices. And by the way, we're always looking for what is the best practice and if we need to make some adjustments. But consistent, fair regulation is a good philosophy in my mind. When this current administration walked in the door, they were talking about energy first the first day. America's energy put first the first day. And it made a huge difference in their philosophy. We're down to only watching of those 144, about 140, frankly, have gone away from the last administration of rules and regulations. We're down to watching 4. And that's a huge difference in philosophy. It also means that the agency needs to have good staff and be more vibrant to make sure we're complying and that people are complying with those rules and regulations that are on the ground. We want to make sure we're protecting the environment, not just for the short term, but the long term. But what this administration recognizes is one size doesn't fit all. We're not the same as Oklahoma or New Mexico or North Dakota or Alaska. And Texas does a good job and has historically done a good job with our rules and regulations. And so that's important. But it's also, we've had a lot more conversation back and forth between Texas and this administration, the EPA, for instance, about what needs to be done differently, what we do well in Texas, what other states do well. There's a lot more conversation between states about how we all work together. And I think that's been a real positive for all of us. And this administration appreciates what the jobs, frankly, this industry has created, and has worked hard to try to get opportunities across the world for this energy industry. And in fact, as we were having issues between Saudi Arabia and Russia, this administration and the president being the lead was on the phone with their leaders as well, trying to get them to make 10 million barrels a day of cuts so this industry could survive. National security is really important. You've got an LNG market, of which 3 have been planned and are 2 on the ground and open in Texas, LNG terminals, another one being built, and others being permitted as we speak. So LNG is important across the world. And so that's an opportunity for us to continue working with friends like South Korea, Poland, other countries as well. And so that's been a priority for this administration. Looking at kind of what the Biden administration could bring to the table. Obviously, we look at what AOC is planned and Green New Deal. And frankly, that's a real challenge for this state and this country going forward in my mind. So of a $90 trillion hit to companies and to this industry, banning fracking, particularly on federal lands, and make Texas a little bit stronger since we don't have a lot of federal lands, but banning fracking on federal lands across the country. And that puts us behind instead of being able to be a net exporter, which is where we were as we ended the year last year. So as you're going out and voting, if you haven't voted yet, please go vote. And as you're going out and looking, I ask you to look at what the energy industry does, not just for Texas, but across the world, and make that one of the things you look at in your voting plan. So with that, Marianne, I'm gonna stop there, and I'm sure there's some good questions. Sydney, I'm sorry, you're gonna be the question asker. I'll be glad to answer anything, and thank y'all for having me today.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. We appreciate that update. So I'm Cindy Thomas from the Chamber's Advocacy Committee, and I'm going to facilitate the Q&A portion of the session. So we do have a few follow-up questions. You already answered one from the chat, so appreciate that. Already on it. Question 1. So we've heard the word pivot used frequently throughout this year to describe how companies and industries are handling the pandemic and responding to it. So what are some of the changes you've seen in oil and gas in regards to the pandemic?
Well, so first and foremost, it's a great question. First and foremost, obviously, we've seen quite a few layoffs. So we're watching companies streamline, figure out how to innovate. We're watching several M&As. So we've seen about 3 or 4 big ones already. And I think mergers and acquisitions, I think you'll continue to see that. I also think, unfortunately, you're going to see bankruptcies coming out of this. We've seen some, and I don't think that's over, unfortunately for a lot of people. But as we kind of move through this, and I think, again, it's a lot of supply and demand. And until the demand begins to really recover, not just in the country, but frankly across the world, I think you'll see this imbalance today. Companies don't need as many drilling rigs, right? But they're still producing a lot. So I think you're seeing companies try to figure out what the next innovation is, how they can streamline their world and still really, frankly, make money or survive. I'm hopeful that by the end of this year, first and next year, that we end up more in the $40 to $45 range. We're at $40 today and been flat, give or take, which is was a win starting in May, since we were negative at one point. But I think you're going to see this industry flat for a short term. As demand recovers, hopefully by next year, sometime second, third quarter, I think you'll begin to see some people drill a little bit more. Although, like I said, we've put some drilling rigs on the ground in the last 60, 90 days. And I think there's some people are seeing opportunity long term.
That's great. And then, so moving on, what steps are being taken to help with the excess of produced water?
So produced water is a real challenge and has been for us. I've said for years, if you're in the oil and gas industry, you're not just in the oil and gas industry, you're in the fluids industry, because water is really important. When I first got to this agency, adjusted some rules that had to do with recycling, and we've seen some of that be helpful to this industry about recycling, that people are reusing water. But now what I'm hearing from the oil and gas industry, again, innovation helps a lot, and cost efficiencies and cost effectiveness is always the driver when you're looking at things that people aren't even recycling. They're basically treating that water almost on site and just reusing it again as they're fracking. So we may skip some of the recycling part of the world and just start reuse straight up, which would be great. I think there's some real opportunity for that. But I do think there's a lot of companies still looking. I wouldn't call it, there's not a magic pill for this, because where I am in one place, if you go a mile down the road, the water may look different, right? So that's been the real challenge. I think one of the challenges in this industry. Two, one of the real priorities always is working with your landowners and your mineral owners, that as you're out there developing a piece of property, if you're an operator, well, sometimes they really would like you to buy their surface water or their fresh water or their well water. And so that's been a good opportunity for that landowner to make some money as well. You want everybody to have some participation in the project. And so you don't want that. You don't want to mandate that you can only use recycled, but I would say about 85% of the water being used in the Permian Basin today is recycled or reused water. But if you get in a different basin, again, it's where one size doesn't fit all. If you get in a different basin, like the Eagle Ford, for instance, depending on where you are, they don't get the volume of flow back. So you can't recycle and can't reuse as much water in the Eagle Ford area. So I think that companies still, that's a priority for them to figure out what they do with water and how we do it smarter in this whole entire state. And what we've tried to do is make sure we adjust our rules, or as companies come in, they say, look, we've got this innovation technology. Will you work with us? And we have, because I think the innovation is not going to come from the regulator. It's going to come from industry. And that's where we've really prioritized that as well.
And certainly set a standard then for other states as well.
We are. And, we're different than Pennsylvania in that respect. They're mandating recycling, but Texas doesn't have that mandate. Again, we're seeing the technology grow and maybe not completely skip recycling, but see some other opportunity differently than I think we would see if you were in Pennsylvania, for instance.
Another question from the chat. Apart from your budgeting priority, is there anything you're looking to see in the next legislative session pertaining to the Railroad Commission?
That's our priority. Really, the budget is our priority this session, in making sure that the dollars that we are capturing continue to go to this agency instead of the general revenue fund. That's been one of our priorities. We've got a couple of other little small things that we'll work on. And obviously the legislature will have some things. We always want to make sure we're giving them good information. And I think the real question for all of us is, how does the legislature meet this session? Do we ever get to go in the building, which may or may not be a bad thing for some of us. But I do think that we always get a lot of feedback. And like I said, I think we'll see something potential in flaring, maybe eminent domain, which at this point as an agency, we're not in the middle of, but we get questions about eminent domain on a regular basis. But our priority really for the session is our budget. That's our big ask for the session. And I think that this legislative session, I think will be focused a lot on the budget. And because there are going to be a lot of, not just agencies, but a lot of the states having some real challenges still. And I think also, as we go into the session, and hopefully everybody filled out a census, they're looking at redistricting. So those will kind of be the two priorities going into the session. And hopefully they forget about us and just give us some dollars to continue IT. And I want to touch on that again, because IT really is a priority for us. We went in last session and said, look, we've got a plan to get off our mainframe with the Fortran. And everybody looked at us and went, no, I promise you, we're one of the 5 agencies with this. And it's crazy. We regulate the second most technologically advanced industry in the entire world, and we're on old stuff. And everybody wants our data. And so when we said, look, we've got basically a $60 million project over 6 to 8 years, we think we can do it all, get all of our forms online. We actually are in the process as of last week or week before of now where you can we're going to try to auto signature your forms if you're in the pipeline world. See, we're making real progress. So everybody else is doing that regularly, right? We're just starting that. And so that's been a priority. We've got $25 million that we will spend for this biennium. And so to move us forward. And so we don't want to stop. If we have to stop, it obviously costs a lot more. And so that priority will continue to be there. And then a bunch of people ask us about well plugging. We do have abandoned orphan wells across the state. About 3 years ago, we managed to plug almost 3,000 in the biennium. Our goal is to plug 1,400 a year in this, which we did in the first year of the biennium. That's our goal this next year as well. And those are important. And yet we're treading water when you look at the number of abandoned orphan wells that we continue to acquire as a state. We have about 6,000 in this state on any given day. And so that's, we don't want an environmental risk. And we not only have them on somebody's ranch today but we have about 75 out in the Bay and Bay Area. And we're in the process of doing about 3 of those because there are some environmental risks and those cost a lot of money to do. So that, those priorities for us will continue this next cycle.
That's great. Another question from the chat that we've got, is there anything at the state level that the commission is doing to help incentivize Texas-based oil and gas companies to hire and or promote well-qualified minorities to C-suite positions, or I'd say even board positions within their organizations?
So obviously we look at minority and when we're contracting, that's one of the things the legislature's put in place for all state agencies is obviously to look at hubs and other minority opportunities. We continue to work at that. I will say this, in some parts of our agency, we have quite a few, and in other parts we don't. And that's a challenge for this industry. It's not always been an industry that has attracted the high minority community. But we look for best applicants and best qualified people, not just minorities, but women as well as former military. All of those people we look for and hopefully find good people. And so we're always looking for the best people. It isn't just minorities. And frankly, at one point, women were running our entire agency. About 3 years ago, we had executive director, head of our oil and gas division, and head of our pipeline division were all women. Today, head of our pipeline division is still there. Our head of our oil and gas division has now gone on, and she's head of the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission. So we put her in a good place, if nothing else. So we're looking for good qualified people, but frankly, we're in a hiring freeze right now, I think like most of this industry is. But if there's somebody we need to look at, we've always been looking for good qualified people.
And then I'll just have 2 more questions before we close today. But if the current administration is replaced with the Biden-Harris administration, are there any plans or practices that would be put into place to remain profitable? And does that include increasing international dealings?
Well, so we don't get in the private sector as much. What you'll see this agency make sure we do is have consistent regulations and continue to communicate with not just the federal government, but other states I call it promote Texas, quite frankly, because I think we do some of the best job in the country as far as what our operators do across the state. But I think that will be a real challenge for us, is to make sure we're educating the new administration about where Texas is successful, what we've been doing. Again, we don't have a lot of federal land, which will be a real opportunity for people if they've got positions in Texas. I think we'll see people leave New Mexico potentially if there's a ban on fracking. 50% of their land in New Mexico is federal land. And if those opportunities aren't there, there's opportunity in Texas. But it not just goes to Texas. I will say about drilling, it's also about making sure pipeline permits get processed timely through FERC. Also, LNG terminal permits as well. We've seen a lot of that be more streamlined and more effective through this administration. I hope that doesn't change much to the next administration, as well as, and I always say, people are like, why is this important? But our ports are really important. So if we don't continue dredging our ports, the Port of Corpus is the biggest net energy exporter port in the entire country. The Port of Houston is the largest port that's energy related in the entire country. And so those ports are really important to us, and continuing to get appropriate dollars into those port areas as they develop new projects will be important. It will be a priority. And frankly, continue to have good conversations with Mexico, our neighbor to the south. We send about 1.6 trillion BCF a day to Mexico of natural gas, and our friends in Canada, who we've had a lot of conversation with and get their heavy crude. Those partners are important to us in the North American continent as well. So USMCA has been a priority for us, and frankly for Texas. And we hope that whatever the next administration is realizes that and continues to understand that process as well for us.
Certainly. And despite the hiring freeze sort of industry-wide, what would your words of advice be to any recent college graduates pursuing a career in oil and gas?
I think that's a good question. I think that's always the challenge, is making sure we've got a good educated workforce long-term. And so, we've got people, as I said, we've lost a bunch of jobs right now. Those jobs, not all of them, but a bunch of them will come back. And for those of us who've got small kids who play video games, let me say this, that's the new thing. So in the oil and gas industry. So I think there's still going to be opportunity. You'll see some streamlining, obviously, but I think we're always looking for good workers. Long term, frankly, this industry is not going away. It's going to come out changed again, and that's normal. And I can't tell you what the change looks like exactly, but you're going to see a streamlined, more technologically advanced industry come out of this process. And I think that's good news, and with a lot of opportunity. This industry is important, not just for Texas, but across the world. The oil and gas industry is going to be around for the next 150 years. And those people who figure out how to survive in this industry, but also innovate and bring new technology is where, and we do not have enough workforce for that to happen in the short and the long term. So I think there'll be some long-term opportunity as well.
And hopefully get those auto signatures up and running.
That's right. We're working on it. We're now filing more stuff online. So we're at about 80%, almost 90% of our forms are online. When I got here, it was all in hard copy. So we've come a long way. We got a long way to go, but we've got come a long way. And so, and it's really important. Look, we want people to have access to everything that we do. That's part of our job as an agency too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Commissioner Craddick. We really appreciate it, you joining us, and hopefully in the future. I want to thank all of our sponsors for joining us. Of course, our presenting sponsor, Kelly Hart, our platinum sponsors, Bell, BNSF Railway, Lockheed Martin, Simmons Bank, our gold sponsor, Spectrum Enterprise, and silver sponsors, Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Texas Health Resources, and the University of Texas at Arlington. And thank you, everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.